5, 4, 3. CGP Video Pictures presents Trek Tonight Season 2. This week, Strange New Worlds. With your hosts, Christopher Pitcher, Leo Byrne-Janicek, and Keith Jacobson. Tonight's review, The Cloak of War. Now live from New York City, Wilmington, Delaware, and Everett, Washington, it's Trek Tonight. Hey, Trekkers, and welcome back to the second hour we have going tonight, courtesy of Paramount dropping an extra episode on us this week and letting us see everything a week early. A week early, though, that means it ends a week early.
Yep.
Ooh,
What will we do?
We'll just have to suffer and sweat.
We will have to suffer as well. I'm going to take this moment, actually, to make a little announcement, and we'll mention it later on as we get closer to the end. But I think Trek Tonight's going to take a little vacation in between Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks. We'll see as we get to it. But we've produced over 84 episodes of content without any fail in between now and then, and we might take a little break, but that would be our launch of our season 3 of Lower Decks. So that's kind of exciting news. Let's see. Lower Decks starts on Eric Hutz's birthday.
Eric, you lucky dog. I think I heard that they did that on purpose.
I think they did. Eric was a super fan.
I assume you'll be here chiming in with comments rather than celebrating with your family.
Of course. Eric wouldn't miss it for a beat, you know.
I mean, who's more important? What family is more important, the real family or our Star Trek family?
There you go. I mean, if you listen to Will Wheaton talk about it, Star Trek family is everything. So
yes.
Hey, I'm not sure exactly who they are, but 4 people have hung in there to watch this episode so far.
Thank you.
And I know Eric is one of the
persons, people.
We're breaking Eric up with our joke about that. So thank you to 5 viewers. Thank you.
Thank you
for coming back. Thank you for coming back and joining us. Well. Cloak of War.
Ooh.
Totally different tone. Angela. Angela's here.
Yo, Angela.
Thank you.
Staying up late on the West Coast. It's not really that late for you.
No.
Much later for us.
So the shank of the evening.
I took a 2-hour nap today, so I would still have energy, and drank many cups of Rectigino. Speaking of okay, so all right, let's get this out of the way. Blah 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 blah. Spoiler alert, guys.
Yep.
We will be talking about the details of Cloak of War. So if you haven't seen it, don't let us ruin it for you. Go back, watch it, stream it on Paramount Plus, and then come back and watch us. But since you're here, we're going to spoil it anyway. So
been warned.
At any rate, but I was going to say, so here's our brief nutshell description. Basically, the Enterprise has been charged to transport a unique ambassador to, I guess, a peace conference or peace talks. And it turns out that he is an ex-Klingon general. And the tension that comes from that is that several members of the key crew on the Enterprise were deeply involved in the war with the Klingons and also know who this man was during the war, and that he had a reputation of being pretty ruthless. And so the episode then is about them dealing with having to come face to face with this guy who claims to have changed his ways and defected to the Federation and wants to be an ambassador for peace. Wow. First impressions, guys, on this one. Who wants to jump in?
Woof. All right, I'll take a stab at this.
Okay, Keith.
So, last episode I was doing there was jocularity was overflowing. Yeah, not so much today. Not so much today. It's a good episode. It's a fantastic episode. Don't get me wrong.
Oh
but
yeah.
So different from the Lower Decks thing we just watched. It's about war and death and justice and forgiveness. And
Redemption is.
What?
Yeah, it asks the question of, is it possible to redeem yourself after doing
Yes,
terrible
redemption.
things?
It is. Woof.
Which I would say is basically the mega theme of the episode about can you redeem yourself?
Right.
Oh, by the way, Angela is spoiling our viewership by saying that she's watching both on YouTube and Facebook. So she's got us in stereo.
Nice.
Yeah. Craig is that telling me that he hopes my Ractagino wasn't too cold. So is that's something I didn't understand. Okay, is the Ractagino supposed to be served cold?
It's supposed to be hot. It's
hot.
it's effectively Klingon coffee.
I understand that, but then what was the whole bit about it being too hot?
Because he burned his hands just picking up the mug. Not only was the Ractagino hot, but they also made the mug super hot. So it needed to cool down enough so you could at least handle it.
Yes.
Right.
It was very interesting because, as we said, there are three members of the crew that we know, or at least of the main crew, who fought in the Klingon War. Dr. Mbenga, Nurse Chapel, and Erica Ortegas. And in fact, Erica, who has the center seat in the beginning of the episode, is talking with Uhura. He's like, well, listen. Uhura's like listing all his accomplishments as a diplomat. Ex-General Raul. And she's like, listen, I don't care. I don't trust this guy. He was called the Butcher of Ja'al, which was a Klingon moon or Klingon-owned moon where the big part of the war, like a land war, was happening on there. They're trying to take this Klingon city. And the rumor is that he slaughtered his own generals in order to defect, and that he ordered the torture and execution of people who were not Klingon soldiers, as we find out later on. But just as she's going on about, like, I don't trust this guy, Pike, Una, and La'an, and the ambassador come onto the bridge, and they're like, and Una is very in the best "this is where fun goes to die" voice says, "Captain on the bridge."
Yeah.
And everybody's like stands up and puts their hands behind their backs, and Erica realizes, like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, because she was mouthing off. Hey, quickly, Scott Taylor is here.
Oh,
for
thank you,
this
Scott.
second hour. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. And Craig does tell us that Ractagino is served both cold and hot, mentioned by Kira on DS9.
Yes.
Fair enough.
There you go.
Apparently, Ractagino becomes very popular in the 24th century.
Yes.
Post peace between Klingon Empire and the Federation. So there is that. He's being given a tour of the ship, and they also do the bosun's whistle, and he's like, "Oh, what is that?" And he's like, "Well, it's a naval tradition." And so you're rolling after the carpet. Right. And he's this guy's super charming and jocular, unlike most Klingons. And when they go to the bar, Spock and Lieutenant Mitchell, who's the navigator, are trying to figure out a way to replicate Ractagino, because he got the recipe in the events of the first episode when they're on that Klingon owned or governed moon, the one they share with the Federation. And Spock is like, I've found myself really interested in learning more about your culture. And the ambassador's like, well, it's nothing but brutality and violence. And Spock is kind of like, oh, he says, no, it's fine. Thank you. I appreciate the effort. And they make it, and then it's like ultra hot, and then they take him to sickbay.
Well, and before we get too down in the weeds and down the pike on the story, one of the things that's important I think we're looking at this to say, because we know from Discovery that Pike was not in the war because the Enterprise was stuck somewhere else and gets damaged.
It was doing deep space exploration, I believe.
Right. But Pike's orders that he's stressing is that we have to offer the ambassador every kindness and hospitality, because that's what his orders are. His orders are to treat this guy well, and that's why Pike decides to make him a dinner, and pull out the stops, making jambalaya and all that stuff. So he recognizes that there are people in the crew that are not going to be comfortable with this and are going to have an opinion and an attitude. But he also stresses that that's what his orders are. Yeah.
And he gives later on, he gives Mbenga and Chapel the option to not. He says, "I'm not." He says, as much as we want to make this guy feel welcome, I'm not going to. I don't want to put you in a position where you're uncomfortable. And presumably, he says the same thing to Ortegas.
Right.
Perhaps after giving her a bit of like, Pike doesn't seem like a chewing out sort of captain.
No.
But he shoots her a look after he leaves the bridge, like, don't fuck up like that, man. He gives her kind of like, I'm kind of disappointed in you moment.
Well, again, that plays into the sort of paternal role that Pike has as his own for commanding the Enterprise.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I had a thought. Go ahead, guys. It'll come back to me.
But when he brings him down to sickbay to get his little dermal regeneration, even though the Klingons endure pain very well, he says, "Well, all the same, I'd feel better. You'd let me take you to sickbay." And there's some other nurse, background actress, gives him like a little, and Mbenga sees him and then backs off into his office, and he's having a complete flashback now.
It's like a panic attack he goes into. He's clutching his side, his heart, and does he give himself an injection? I forget.
I don't think he.
So.
He's looking for something when he's sitting there. He just collapses in the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some instrument, some medical instrument that he's sort of gripping. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah.
But he's definitely having a panic attack and a flashback. And there are a lot of flashbacks in this episode of Mbenga and Chapel's time on the moon of Jahal.
Well, the moon sequences in the past were really intense and fantastically done. And I've got to say, the thing that got me the most was the computer voice announcing every time wounded were showing up on the transporter pad, and it was just relentless. It was just constant, incoming transport, and it's like, at first I'm watching it, I'm thinking, it's kind of like MASH, it's like MASH in the future. They're at the medical hospital, but it as you said earlier, Leo, it didn't have the jocular wit of BJ and all those guys. And it just gets very intense very fast. Chapel all of a sudden it realizes she's not coming on as a nurse, she is the head nurse.
She's the head nurse. And
remind me who the actor is who plays the guy who
Clint Howard, who's Ron Howard's brother, who's first appeared. He's appeared in a whole bunch of Star Trek, including as Blaylock in the Corbinite maneuver, the young Blaylock. He was like, I think he was like 6 or 9 years old.
Blaylock. Oh my God, Blaylock. Yes.
His voice was dubbed because he was a child, and they it was like, here's some Tranya. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. He's definitely has a real history. He has a long pedigree with Star Trek. He's appeared in a lot of other things.
Pedigree with Star Trek. I gotta tell you.
He was in the 10th episode, man. He's old school. He's been on Deep Space Nine. I think he was in, might have been in TNG. I think in Enterprise. He's been in a whole bunch of them. And a lot of times
he's old school.
Yeah. Well, listen, he also, the actor tends to sometimes play sort of weird, creepy characters.
Right.
He was the the serial killer in the episodes of Seinfeld where they go out to L.A. to get Kramer to come back.
Right.
And he's been in a lot of stuff, but he was here. He's Buck, Commander Buck Martinez, I believe, and everybody calls me Buck, and he's very jocular, and I like to see him play. It's nice to see him play. Yeah, I don't want to say against type, but a lot of actors, character actors especially, get sort of pigeonholed as oh, you're the plumber, you're the repair guy, you're always playing that, and that's a good life because you're always working. Because they were like, hey, we need a guy, let's get him. Just like Gabby Hayes was in like every other Western from like 1950 to 1965.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because his opening scene, which is pretty much all you see of him, is that opening introduction scene to Chapel arriving on the, on the moon and at the MASH unit basically, and it starts out sort of a little bit jolly and jocular.
Yeah.
Oh, we call that tent land or whatever it is, and I keep putting in for requests for organ regenerator, but it doesn't get up the up the pipe and blah blah blah. And well, no, you are the head nurse, and it's all very just sort of military jolly in a way.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose when all of a sudden they start getting incoming wounded, and that was really where I first got that MASH thing, because I remember how well MASH used the choppers coming in.
Yeah.
It's an indication that, okay, now things are going to get serious.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was interesting.
It's it also, this is when we see, because they have a patient who comes in who's got bad internal injuries, and they don't have internal organ regenerator.
Yeah.
Despite, requesting one many times.
Right.
So, Mbenga says, all right, we'll keep his pattern buffer. We'll initiate a transport, keep his pattern buffer, cancel the transport. And that way, when we get, because she's like, oh, there's a ship coming, and they'll have a fully stocked sick bay, and they'll be able to help him.
Right.
So they're going to put him in there.
They knew the fleet. They know the fleet is coming for some reason. So they're kind of holding their ground until this fleet shows up.
Right.
But yeah, that's where we first see an inkling of what Mbenga does for his daughter.
Yeah. So
he knows that trick.
Yeah,
and that transporter buffer is going to come back later in the episode.
Right.
Yeah, it does. But and they get in some serious thing where he actually gets Christine Chapel to massage this guy's redlining, and he's like, massage his heart like with your hands, and she does, and they do save this guy. Well, he says, well, how do you feel? He goes, well, I feel like somebody squoze my heart with their hands. He says, well, actually, they did.
They did, yeah. But that was interesting. That was interesting because you've heard that line before between Mbenga and Chapel of "We've got this."
Yeah,
and you see the origin of where that comes from. It came from that moment of anxiety that they were losing a patient and didn't have the proper facilities to save him like they would. And the two of them start sending this thing back and forth to each other about, we've got this.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
So now, sort of back to the present, they have to go to this dinner. Pike is cooking dinner, and Christine is already in there with Spock, and she's sort of like very uncomfortable, and he's trying to make her feel better and not doing a very good job. But to be fair, it would be very difficult, and he does sort of lack the range of emotional experience to maybe say the right thing. He's trying to, but to his credit, he's trying to help, and he does get them. It's like she gets pissed off because he's just talking about all this, like his diplomatic triumphs, and everybody else is charmed by him. And
they're all chuckling at his little witticisms and yeah.
And the actor is very charming. Like, he's very warm and gracious, and for the most part. And Spock asks him this comparison between Sun Tzu's Art of War and a Klingon text, similar Klingon text. It's a wonderful topic of conversation, but at least it gets it off, thing. And he looks, and she's sort of like relieved. Outside, you see Erica pacing back and forth, like, in front of Pike's quarters, and then she's about to just like leave, and then Mbenga shows up, and he's like, Erica, and he's like, and they're talking, and she's like, I can't believe this guy's the Butcher of Jahal. I can't, why we, I know this guy's a bad guy. I can't shake that. And he says, well, listen, we have to put on our Starfleet face. And he says, it's a good face. He says, and, Pike is making jambalaya. She's like, jambalaya.
Yeah.
Apparently his jambalaya is very good. He also earlier got some Delton, was it cilantro? Parsley, which in large quantities is deadly poisonous, but in small quantities, delicious, as we find out.
Yeah, and you know what's funny about that? For my wife, it was a little bit of a red herring because she's like, because they make a point of saying that it is fatal if you use too much of it.
Yeah.
And she's like, is that going to kill the ambassador? And I'm like, no.
Yeah. And who else because when we finally, after, the scene outside the hallway, hallway where where they're all, jambalaya. And then the first thing we see when we do go in there is this bowl of jambalaya.
Yeah.
There. Oh God, I was so hungry at that.
I know, right? Exactly.
I really want. I still want some jambalaya now.
I know. Yeah.
So they have a very awkward dinner, and Erica's sort of the first to crack. You could, and she's like, she says something in Klingon, which is like, Klingon. Remain Klingon, which was the battle cry during the war, and we saw a bit of that in the previously on from first season of Discovery, the Battle of the Binary Stars,
right? And
she was talking about how says you would just hear that on the subspace, and then bam, bunch of friends are dead, and every more number one that Pike is trying to be like, all right, cool your jets. She stands up and she basically is like, he's trying to be, he's not glossing over it, but he's trying to show that listen, yes, there were mistakes made, but I'm trying to atone for this. She is not having any of it, and she leaves. And then Chapel basically is like, I should see if she's going to be okay, and she leaves, which is more of an excuse to leave clearly than
Well, and the interesting part is that, sorry, I'm eating cherries. I'm starving.
Sorry.
At any rate, the interesting part is that you notice these shots of M'Benga's hands just getting tighter and tighter grip on the chair.
Yeah.
And Pike notices it.
Yeah.
So then he basically dismisses M'Benga too, because he's like, maybe you want to give her a hand. But the interesting part, the interesting moment, and this was such a great dramatic moment for me, is then M'Benga gets up, he goes to leave, and the Klingon grabs him by the arm and stops him. And you could just feel the tension in that moment.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, M'Benga is probably thinking, get your effing hand off of me,
Yeah.
And he says, oh, I understand that you practice, whatever
Klingon martial
judo is.
Yeah.
And he wants to get a session in with him. And I'm thinking, wow, you've got some balls, man.
Yeah.
So do you think that, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't remember the name of the Klingon character, Rawl. R-A-H. Yeah, okay. Do you think he knew exactly who M'Benga was?
No.
I don't think he knew exactly. No, he didn't.
Okay.
He knows that he could tell that that he served during the Klingon War. He knew that he
right.
But he does that. He says, well, I'll check my schedule. And it is that's a moment where is M'Benga just gonna haul off and fucking punch this guy square in the nose. Yeah. But he keeps his cool. And it's rough because he's now the interesting thing is the actor who plays M'Benga is a Brazilian martial jiu-jitsu black belt.
Oh, interesting.
So both in the first episode of the season, this episode we get to see him use his martial arts training on camera.
Cool.
Which is much like we'll get to see next week. We'll get to see Celia Rose Gooding show off her pipes in Subspace Rhapsody. Spoiler for next week: it's a musical.
Right.
But back to this. So Spock is trying to console Christine, and again, she goes something like, I can't understand. You can't understand. He goes, I understand. He says, no, actually, I don't.
Yeah.
But it bothers me to see you distressed, and I want to. And she's just like, she can't explain it to him, because if you hadn't gone through it, you just you just can't explain it. And she goes, I just need some time to myself. He goes, I understand. You need some time away from me.
Yeah.
And which is, he's right, but not entirely. It's not that she's sick of him. She's just can't cope with anything at the moment.
Yeah, and she doesn't want him poking around trying to help her when she doesn't really know how she feels.
Yeah.
Keith, up to this point, anything that leaps out at you, anything that was especially interesting or intense, or
Well, the whole thing was pretty intense. For me, the part that I got into, that's the wrong way of putting it. The scenes on Jahal, I can never get that on Jahal, were super intense.
Yeah.
And you get to see the in the flashbacks. There's a special ops team that comes on with the Andorians.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, the universal symbol for Andorians. But and apparently, it looks like M'Benga had some special ops training prior.
He was clearly a military special ops guy of some sort before he.
So he had the record for confirmed hand-to-hand kills,
right?
Which is kind of bananas to think, because I'm a doctor now, I just cure people, and the green stuff
what's it called?
It's an adrenaline surge.
We got a name for it in this episode. What it's called.
But he came up with it. Yeah, and he says, well, do you have any? He says, I don't have any. He says, well, can you make? He says, well, I could. He says, even if I could, I wouldn't do it. Assassin. Yeah. He was. And this guy is like, listen, it's like, we're not asking you to go in the field. Just make us some of this stuff, because we're going to need it. And he refused to do it because he says, well, why? Because injecting yourself with all these like adrenaline and all this other junk tends to mess you up.
Yeah. I love the Andorians as well. I'd rather die tomorrow than today.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great. But let's talk a little bit about the Andorian character, because I thought he was very cool. And I love the production design for Andorians now in this show, because up until this point, they've basically been blue humans with antennas and white hair. Even in Enterprise, it wasn't. I mean, the antennae moved, but it was still basically that look. And now they've got these angular faces. There's something with the eyes is very slim, and they really look alien, which I think is really cool. And I was really glad to see that. Just a tweak on them, on them, but they look more alien now, which I think is great.
I think it is great. It is, I like that.
And that jumps me back. I just have to jump back to last week's to those old scientists, because the Andorians walk across the bar, and Boimler says, "Wow, back when aliens were really aliens," which I thought was funny.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, don't you have aliens? It was like, yeah, but this was the golden age of exploration. All right, let's get back.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the.
So for me, the parts that hit.
Go ahead, Keith. Yeah,
for me, the parts that hit hardest in the show was the end, where the last 10-15 minutes of the show were, for me, the hardest part, where the resolution of what's going on between M'Benga and the Klingon occurs, and we find out more about them.
Also, they do have their sparring session.
Yes.
And you see that the ambassador is not quite as peaceful as he gets some good shots on M'Benga, and you can tell like he still has got skills.
Well, he says I'm not as frail as I look.
Yeah, because he walks with a cane, so which I think is probably a bit of more of a prop for
an affectation. Yeah.
Well,
see, Ortega doesn't believe anything about him.
Yeah.
Ortegas thinks that the whole thing is a fake, that he wants to get a jump on Federation technology. And it's funny because the first thing he says when he shows up on the ship is, "Oh well, I would love to get a tour of your ship."
Yeah.
And you see Ortega and Una look at each other like, "Really?"
Yeah. And he when he's on the bridge, he's like, "What a beautiful view," because it's got that big broad view screen,
big panoramic screen. Yeah.
And he says, "It's a Klingon bird of prey are not designed for for I forget the phrase he used, but basically like
Exploration.
Well, Pikes says, the ship is primarily designed for exploration,
Right.
But apparently Klingon birds of prey don't have big view screens like
Oh,
this.
he was saying something. Yes, saying something about they don't have a need or a design to be able to see everything around them.
Yeah, he says, the Klingons would never admit it, but I think Federation ships are much better.
Right.
And but during the sparring session, he asks Mbenga, says, "Come with me on tours, because you're a veteran, and if we speak together, I think that we can really improve relations between the Klingon Empire and the Federation."
Well, because he knows at that point that Mbenga has some sort of an issue with him.
Well, also he knows that he was at Jahal.
If we were enemies, how much more of an impact would it be if we both went on a tour for peace together? Which he makes a point. I mean, he makes an interesting point.
Yeah, because he's always, "When you want to be my friend," he says, "We don't have to be friends. We just have to be allies."
Right.
And he also, during the dinner, finds out that because they're talking about Jahal, and Mbenga says, "Jahal, changed things for a lot of people," and you're like, he said it with laced with such like meaning and sort of like resentment, justifiably. So
well, and the other thing that he keeps throwing out is the idea that he wants to heal people from their pain from the war.
Yeah.
That comes up a couple of times. And he says, well, and when Ortega leaves, he says, well, everybody has their own journey, they have to take. But yeah.
But he's and then we find out actually then we have the whole thing where they're going to do a big push. I think it's probably maybe before the ships show up. They're going to do a big push because the order's given out, and the Klingons are executing anybody who's not a Klingon soldier, which means Klingon civilians, children.
Yeah.
Which is how he comes to the name the Butcher of Jahal.
Right.
And the Black Ops guys go out, including the guy whose heart they massaged. Is a soldier, and he's from the moon, or is it Mbenga calls it sort of like New Luna or something. It was like he says, well, we just call it the moon. He says, well, I want to hear more about it.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a real cliche, but I thought it worked. Of like the young freshman kid, he's like, and Mbenga's like, listen, I can write you up that you don't you need recovery. Listen, Doc, this is what I do. I'm a soldier,
Right. But as Chappell points out, they just need bodies for the meat grinder, as you call it.
And so the big push happens, and the special op team dies. This kid that Mbenga had spoken to dies, and that just puts Mbenga over the top.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. The thing is, so they need, the transporters are malfunctioning, and they need to beam people out. And they've got a whole bunch of people in the buffers. And she's like, if we have to, she's like, shit, if we clear the buffers, all these people will die, but we need to.
Well, no, it's just the one guy.
Is it just the one guy
that's they have to bring a bunch of people in.
Yeah.
And they can't do that because they're not working. And the only way to do it is to channel everything through one and reboot the system. And if they do that, they're going to lose that guy from the beginning that they were trying to save.
My impression, just because of the graphic, is there was a bunch of red dots in a grid.
That's the people that show up afterwards.
Oh, is that the people that show after?
Yeah,
okay.
That's the people that he's replaced, that he gets replaced by.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's like, well, what are we going to do? And he just presses the button. He gives it, and she's like, what'd you do? And he's like, they beam everybody, and a bunch of people are hurt. and
Right.
dead, including this Andorian special ops guy who Chapel says he's like, for black ops guys, they talk awfully loud. So he's like, they've got the morgue, everybody's stacked up.
It was basically, M'Benga's line was basically a very dark version of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Yeah. So, and M'Benga is just like, he's just pushed to the limit. He takes, because the guy was stabbed through the heart with one of those Klingon dikta, I'm not sure I'm saying it right, the ching knife, I believe, I think it's called dikta, but I may be wrong. If any of our listeners can correct me, I'll happily acquiesce to your greater Klingon knowledge. But so he takes it from the guy, puts on his belt. He's gonna inject himself with the short-term super soldier serum, and he gives one to Christine. Says if they break through the lines and they come, use it to get away.
She doesn't want him to go because the fleet's almost there.
Yeah.
Hang on one second. Leave it to Craig Lubin, even in this episode, to inject humor. He says he wanted to show people. He wanted people to show him their pain. Wait, was he really Cybok all along?
Yes.
Thank you for that, Craig.
Yeah.
For that moment of levity.
Yes. If Cybok could have looked through the screen at me, he would have seen my pain.
Yeah.
And I would not be alone.
My pain, that whole film.
Anyway,
yeah.
So he goes in there, and he does get out, and they both get out and survive this horrific ordeal.
Right.
And then there's a scene back in the present where number one is like, listen, we got to get this guy off the ship. Morale is really down.
Right.
And we found a quicker route through this nebula that will get us there.
Yeah, I thought that was cool because Pike assesses that situation instantly, and he's just like, yes, change course.
Yeah.
Which was great. I mean, that's the kind of thinking you want in a captain who's paying attention to his crew.
Yeah,
indeed. You want someone.
I'm gonna have to get some
on the topic.
I'm gonna have to get some opinion and clarification though from you guys, because in that last scene between M'Benga and the Klingon, so you see flashbacks to M'Benga killing people in order to get to him, and okay, my understanding is that the general is basically throwing people at him in order to escape himself.
I don't know. Well, he's throwing, but here's the thing: is M'Benga was going in there to kill as many people. And he wanted to get the general,
right?
Because he's the architect. He ordered all the execution, torture, not just execution, but the torture and execution of civilians. So. Three of his the generals, sort of like lieutenants or warlords, are there, and M'Benga, because there's a flashback where the general is killing all these guys, but then the real we find out that M'Benga killed all those guys. He's the actual butcher, he's called that because he killed, not just because of killing the civilians, but also because he killed his own men. Yeah, he killed his own men in order to defect, but he just fucked off and left these guys in M'Benga's
That's what
path.
I wanted clarification on.
Because he says he says it's his cowardice. Because he realizes, I'm going to be off the ship by tomorrow. I really want you to come with me on this. And M'Benga's like, I'm not going to do it. Just please leave me alone. And he's literally going like this.
When he's like this. Yeah, that was fantastic. Oh, by the way, Angela, thank you. Klingon Blade is a Diktang.
Yeah, the Klingon pronunciation is always a little challenging because it's not always phonetic.
Yeah.
Because Kronos is spelled with a Q. So anyway, as is Kapla. Anyway, so yes. The Klingon turd voiding ritual.
Yeah. Plop. Yeah. At any rate.
So they're arguing. He's like, and Bang is like, and then he admits he's like, basically, I don't want to go with you because you're a fraud, you're a liar, and he admits that he's the one who killed it. And they're getting to this whole argument, and you get the impression that the general is actually ashamed because he did turn tail,
right.
Like as much as that the Federation saved my life and I'm dedicating myself to peace, in his heart he knows he's a coward.
Right.
He ran to avoid either capture or death.
And during this conversation between M'Benga and M'Benga says a line that I think gets to the heart of the matter, and I think is perhaps an arc that M'Benga is on that I don't think is going to get completed. It may not get completed this season. It might end up going into next season.
Right.
Basically, the Klingon is doing this. I'm just like here. I'm having a hard time with the Klingon's name again. What's the Klingon's name again?
Rawl.
Rawl. Rawl is basically trying to get forgiveness. He's trying to get redemption.
Right.
And M'Benga says something to the fact that some things are unforgivable.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's not really talking about Rawl at that moment. He's really a lot of what M'Benga is saying in this sequence is really about himself.
Oh yeah.
M'Benga doesn't feel that he's worthy of redemption. Doesn't feel that he's, and I think this whole doctor thing that M'Benga is doing is his version of what Rawl is doing by being a diplomat.
You got it, my friend.
Yeah, and also, the difference between you and me is I'm ashamed of what I've done.
Right.
Yeah.
Like this guy doesn't seem. He doesn't seem ashamed. He doesn't.
And it's my theory, starting as I went through this whole episode, I'm thinking to myself, okay, now I really see it. We've seen it twice in the season. We've seen it in the episode where M'Benga and Chapel have to fight their way onto the Klingon version of the Federation ship, and they end up taking the injection. And then we see it in this one. And I think now we're sort of seeing the creation of canon as to why M'Benga fades out as the chief medical officer on the Enterprise.
I think you're right. I think you're
Could
right.
be. I'll be curious to see how they do that in a way that serves the character. It's interesting. There was a proposed spin-off of Star Trek, a medical drama, like on a medical ship. And the original Dr. M'Benga had a brother who was also another doctor who's going to be, like, the brothers were going to be on the ship.
Right.
And sadly we never got that. We never got a fourth season original series. But I'm wondering if, because I don't know if Dr. M'Benga in the original series was given a first name, if he was just referred to as Dr. M'Benga. So I'm wondering if they're actually two different characters.
Possibly. Possibly.
I hope not. I think that would be a dirty bait and switch.
Well, I guess it's tough because we know that he was a doctor, but he was not the head. He was not the chief medical officer. So does something come up? Does he get demoted? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point. CSI Star Trek. I would watch the fuck out of CSI Star Trek.
Yeah, there you go. Star Trek procedurals.
Yes.
So then,
one of them should be a Vulcan and be like, looks like he uses. I guess he beamed up the wrong way. Raise eyebrow and like, bow. And then play some Rolling Stones, and then
so we're kind of towards the end of the episode now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I want to talk about the ending because I have very specific thoughts as to what really happened there. But
so they're struggling, and M'Benga opens up his this case. It looks like the same case he had back on Jahal,
right?
And there's that Klingon dagger,
right,
in there, and we see it, and then Nurse Chapel comes in from another entrance into sickbay, and there's like a frosted glass sort of, in between the two, and you see them struggling.
Well,
and
yeah,
then,
when she walks in, she hears them arguing.
yeah,
Right.
And then when she looks over through the frosted glass, she can see they've got their hands on each other. And then you basically see the general keel over.
but if you notice, he has his hand on the dagger, and then it's like it falls away. So, and the next thing is she's being interviewed by La'an and the captain. Is that they were arguing, how Dr. Mbenga had to defend himself, and or he killed. I think I think he said that the ambassador killed himself. Was that her line? Now
I don't remember, but I do remember that the clever thing about Mbenga holding on to that dagger is that it had DNA of the generals that were killed.
Yeah.
That the general Rawl is common knowledge or thought is that he killed them.
Right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't appear as though it's something that Mbenga held on to and used.
Yeah.
It looks like something he held on to and used.
Right.
So, and that's part of my whole understanding of it is that Mbenga kills him.
I think you're right, although it is left ambiguous.
It is.
Which I find interesting. Maybe this is the thing that will get Mbenga demoted eventually.
Right.
But to her credit, Chapel defends him. And
and even Pike, in his usual fashion, says, if you started it, the odds are there'll be an inquiry, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And
I'm not sure it's really all that important, at least for today's episode.
Right.
I'm not sure it's all that important whether or not Mbenga actually kills him or not.
Okay, why do you say that, Keith?
Because what's important about this is we get to see after this fight is over, we get to see the final scene. And Mbenga still feels guilty about everything. We have this big conversation between Mbenga and Pike.
Right.
And the point of the conversation is that while Pike is all, things can always get better, Mbenga is essentially saying some things are not worth redeeming. Some things are unredeemable. So whether or not he kills him or not, he still feels guilty over everything that happened on Jahal.
But he does say something about justice being served. And his last line is, I may not have started the fight, but I'm glad he's dead.
Yeah.
Sure. He's glad he's dead. I mean, he does. Yes, he feels guilty, but I think he still feels guilty, and that's why I'm not sure it's all that important, at least as far as the theme of today's episode goes.
Right.
Whether or not who actually killed.
Right. Well, and to me, the very blank look on, and very blank yet powerful look on his face as he's looking at Pike when he delivers that line, to me was very telling. Because he's basically looking at him like, I'm glad he's dead, and whether or not we're going to say that I started it or not, I'm glad he's dead. So I don't know. I thought it was really powerful at the end.
It was also, he says, well, you have the privilege of believing the best of everybody.
Great line.
And I've seen the worst of people.
Right.
So, they're good friends, and they've known each other many years, but, as pointed out by Chapel, like, unless you were there, you're just not going to understand.
Right.
And I think it's the war has taken a toll on a lot of people. Erica generally is I would say an upbeat person. She's charming and funny, and but she also carries with her, rage and probably anger and some guilt over what happened.
And let's think of this, okay? Because in this episode of Star Trek, and in this time period of Star Trek, we are closer to the Klingon War than we were in the original series to the Romulan War.
Right.
And so the attitude there is Kirk saying to the guy, leave your prejudice in your quarters.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, people get it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how the span of time can affect people's attitude.
It's true. And also the fact that, and Benga points out this, the diplomatic corps knew what this guy was and they still used him.
Right.
So.
Yeah, which reminded me a little bit of the after World War II, the U.S. trying to gobble up German scientists.
Yeah.
So,
and the Russians did the same thing too, but there was, there was a lot of, it's an interesting, I mean, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, but it certainly resonates with that. And it was interesting, the idea of a Klingon the defected who then became like this very important ambassador. And again, the guy was very charming, and he was well suited for the life of a diplomat.
Much more charming than we've seen other Klingons be.
Right.
I actually think more charming, pound for pound, than what was his name? The head of the High Council of the Klingons in Star Trek Undiscovered Country.
Oh, you mean not General Chang?
No, the other one. The guy was
David Warner, Chancellor
Gorkon.
Gorkon, yeah.
Yeah. I think he was more charming than Gorkon.
He was a little slicker than Gorkon. Seemed like a very sort of like serious guy, and this guy was a little bit. Let me tell you some stories on hold court, and I'm, whereas Gorkon seemed to be like very serious about peace,
right?
And there are certain parallels to this to Undiscovered Country, sort of a disastrous dinner,
yes,
tensions, but again, just different enough that you're not like, oh, they're just redoing that.
Yeah.
But it is a reflection of it. This was an excellent episode, and I like the fact that it leaves it Operation Paperclip. Yes, that's what they did.
Thank you, Scott.
Is how there is not a clear answer to this question. The question of what you did, like what you did in the war, like was it justified?
Right.
Like how far can you go? It felt very much as though it was they left it ambiguous, so people could have discussions and think about it. So because I don't think there is a clear like right or wrong answer in those sorts of situations.
No, but interesting. Just interesting. Very, very powerful. I thought it was a really great episode, and it was kind of a real contrast to last week.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was neat because as much as we all enjoyed the fun and frolic of last week's episode, it was nice to have the show come back to something with a message, right. Which was very TOS, and to come back to something powerful for the characters and for the actors to work with. So that was cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Any last thoughts on it, guys? Believe it or not, we're making it to the last few minutes of the show.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wide awake. I'm not even tired.
Well, good
Excellent.
for you.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're getting.
Means we're entertaining.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe not.
You guys are always entertaining to me.
There you go. Well, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I will say that I'm glad we're getting, if not a full Ortega's episode, we're getting to see more of her. I feel like the first season, not that she wasn't there, but I felt like she never got the focus I would have liked.
Same here. I
so,
want to see more Ortegas.
And
we know somewhere we're going to see an episode with her referring to her time in the war again and piloting a shuttle because it was in the trailer.
That's got to be in the last episode.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess. It might be next week, but I don't think so.
No, I don't either.
I don't think it's going to be in the musical episode, which apparently also Kirk is going to be in, it looks like. I
In
saw
the musical?
still.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how this all plays out.
We will all warm up our voices and put on our tap shoes and get ready for the musical for next week.
Yes.
I think it's probably going to be what they used to call what do they call it, a box show or a 4-wall show?
A bottle episode.
Bottle episode. That's it. Bottle episode. There you go. I knew it was some sort of a vessel.
Yes. But this was a terrific episode.
It
Very,
was.
like I said, asking questions, moral questions, a very Star Trek thing.
Yeah,
Right.
Not
and it was a
necessarily
classic
providing an answer.
show. A classic Trek show.
Yeah. Oh, boy. All right, guys. As I said earlier, now I can say live long and prosper, and we hope you have a great week. We will be back again, regular time, 9 o'clock, for the musical episode, the Subspace Rhapsody, which should be entertaining and interesting to see what they do with that. And I do not think they're going to be dropping any more sneak episodes in on us, so we'll probably just have the one to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah. But at any rate, hey, guys, have a great week. And we will see you back for next week for the musical. And I'm going to roll us out of here. Good night, everyone.